Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Fall Jersey. Joe Archino back here, and the goal is to get as much information as possible into as few segments as possible to break down the NCAA tournament, which is starting just tomorrow. And certainly, I think everybody is kind of scrambling for that last minute info and just getting it as simply as possible so you could get different options. And certainly, yesterday, the thought that has persisted and it continues to persist is that this NCAA tournament is defined by uncertainty. It's clearly more so than maybe we have ever seen because of the up and down season we have seen, and really no one ever solidifying themselves consistently as one of the top teams in the country. We have an idea. I think we know that there are 6 or 7 teams that will most likely win this thing, but trying to decide who those 6 or 7 will be based on the sequencing and then the up and down pattern of the year is very difficult, but that's what makes the tournament so much fun. So without any further ado, let's go right into it. We'll start with the South and the West in segment number 1, and then in segment number 2, we'll hit on East and the Midwest, and then we can kind of move forward from there. But of course, starting off with the number 1 overall seed, you have Kansas. I don't think any of us realistically, most of us have Kansas in our Final Fours. I have them in my Final Four, as most people do, progressing further and further. You have Colorado and UConn. Tough one. I think all the 8-9 matchups are very difficult, but in a lot of these games, the things that if you ever have doubts that you always go to is you look at the things that matter. You look at who has the more tournament-ready coach with more experience, the more tournament-ready players, the veteran leadership, the guard play. All those things, I think, help you in these 8-9 matchups, and UConn, just another one of those. You pick them there. Maryland and South Dakota. South Dakota is good. A lot of these smaller ones don't get the same recognition because we don't pay as much attention, especially with the NBA and the way that it's sequenced in between college basketball. If we're not watching the NBA, we're watching a Kentucky or a Duke or a Maryland or a Michigan State. We don't have time to be watching a side like South Dakota, but Maryland's very good. You have to go with Maryland there. Hawaii and California is an interesting one. Hawaii gets the 13 seed here, but Hawaii is very good. I've got them winning here against California. I haven't seen anything from California or read anything about California that has really made me feel confident that they can take down a Hawaii team that's been very good this season. Again, has been one of the more under the radar ones, but if you really have paid attention, they've had a very nice year, and I've got them pulling off the win there. Arizona playing in this one against the winner, now Michigan State, because they won by 20 against Vanderbilt last night, but I like Arizona a lot. Some people don't like them as much in this tournament, but I always go with you have to trust coaches who've had tournament teams with a lot of success. Sean Miller has had a lot of success with his teams in this tournament. I trust him. I trust his team. I have him winning this one. Miami, Jim Larrañaga is as good as it gets. Have a personal connection because Coach Jack Kerr, coach at Archbishop Malloy in New York. He is a New York legend. He was one of his guys. Larrañaga is as good as it gets. I like his Miami team a lot. Moving on here, Temple and then Iowa is an interesting one. I didn't like Iowa in football this year. I don't like them in basketball this year. I've got the Owls beating them. And then Nova and then UNC Asheville. Villanova is a very difficult one because we all love Jay Wright. His team had moments where they could have held on to the number 1 spot for a while, but they could not get it done. He knows the talk that is happening. His team really has failed and not lived up to expectations in this tournament in recent memory, but of course they start off fine here. Then we move forward a little bit into the second round. Of course, in the third rounds and the later rounds, we'll keep on going, but I think Kansas, Maryland, I have Arizona and Villanova. I've got Kansas beating Maryland. I've got Arizona beating Villanova. Now, almost everyone has Kansas advancing. And then not as many people, though, have Arizona going as far as I do. I have Kansas playing Arizona and then Kansas going to the Final Four. But again, like I said, I think in a season like this that's been defined by so much inconsistency and so much uncertainty, you have to go with the things that have been certain before. What has been certain is Sean Miller is a great coach in the NCAA tournament. His teams are always prepared. They've always got good players. I'm going to go with Sean Miller to get his team through this. Jay Wright, again, I'm going with what I've seen, the patterns. his teams have just not lived up to expectations this season. They've had moments where they could have really put their stamp of approval on it, losing to Seton Hall the way they did just this past weekend. That didn't rub well with me. I like Arizona. I like Sean Miller. I trust them. And then Bill Self's probably got the best team in the country. So I have Kansas going to the Final Four, but I have Kansas playing Arizona right before they're able to get there. But now we will move to the West. The West, to a lot of people, is probably the weakest region. I don't know if I buy that. I do think it's very competitive. Maybe weak is just kind of the word in comparison to the rest, but I do think the West is rather strong. Oregon, I have winning in their first one. Of course, they get the number 1 seed. A lot has been written about their versatility, their unorthodox way of doing things, but it's wielded a lot of success for them this season. I have them playing St. Joe's. I have St. Joe's advancing against Cincinnati. Haven't liked Cincinnati in tournament in recent memory. I just don't think they have those definable scores you could go to when you really need buckets. And I think against a team like St. Joe's, I like St. Joe's better than them. Baylor. Yale is becoming quickly one of the go-to upset picks. Of course, Baylor has more of the flash and the name recognition, but we've seen the schools like Yale, these very high IQ basketball programs, do very well in recent memory. Baylor does not play as smart as they do, and if you're a team and you're going to play smart, I'm going to take you. And I like Yale over Baylor. I've seen it from enough smart people to buy into it. I'm going Yale over Baylor. Then you've got, of course, Duke playing UNC Washington. Not really a surprise. I don't think anyone's not going with Duke here. Texas, of course, most people picking them. I'm as well. And then I have Texas A&M beating Green Bay. And Texas A&M is a very good team here. Again, you have to look at, like I keep on saying, list the things that make you trust the team. The veteran presence on Texas A&M is certainly something that has to give you a lot of confidence. Veteran leadership is so important when you get into the tournament. Head coaches who've been here before and players who have been here before are so critical, and I think Texas A&M, that's one of the reasons you've really got to like them in this spot. Oregon State against Virginia Commonwealth. I love Oregon State. I love Gary Payton II. I mean, he is as good as it gets. Guard play, it's not as important, and it's always a cliche, but it matters. It really does. Guard play matters. They have one. You look at the next one, Oklahoma, of course, the number 2 seed. Everyone's going to have them moving on, but in these next matchups, I have Oregon over St. Joe's. I have Duke over Yale, Texas A&M over Texas, and then Oklahoma over Oregon State. And all those matchups, I think, don't take too much overthinking. Maybe the toughest one here is Texas A&M against Texas. I like Shaka Smart, of course. He's as good as it gets in the coaching ranks, but I just think the veteran presence of Texas A&M is going to be enough, and it really does have a big emphasis here. But we move forward. I have Oregon beating Duke, and I have Oklahoma beating A&M. This is really the only one of the interesting ones where I think you have the true 1 and the true 2 playing against one another. But again, you hear about Oregon. They do things in an unorthodox way. But I think sometimes when you do things in an unorthodox way, that worries me when you get into a tournament environment, because if you've done things so different and outside the box, and you have to resort back to the fundamental ways of winning, which is at the end of the day what we see win so much in the tournament, I just don't know if I have as much faith as I do in a team like Oklahoma. And again, Oklahoma, they've got their problems as well. They have not been able to always solidify themselves. But I think you look at the consistency of their shots. They have the best player in this region in Buddy Hield, who, of course, has been one of the best players in college basketball this season. I think all those things culminate and give you more faith in Oklahoma to advance to the Final Four. So, of course, from the South and from the West, I have Kansas and I have Oklahoma as the two teams from those two regions making it to the Final Four. And you look at those things right there. And, of course, again, like I always say, coaching matters. Bill Self, probably the better coach out of those matchups. And I do have Kansas moving in to the championship game like most people do. But I think, again, you look at all these two regions, you look at the South, you look at the West, a lot of this comes down to the coaches who've been there before. I would say out of from my bracket, the one team that I like most and most people do is Arizona. But like I said, Sean Miller is a tournament-ready coach. His teams always get far in this competition, and I think in a season like this where it's harder than ever to predict what's going to happen, go with the consistency and the patterns that you've seen before. Sean Miller has shown it before. But again, one more time before I move on to the next segment, Kansas and Oklahoma in the Final Four, and I have Kansas advancing to the national championship game. I will post the links to all this stuff later. But again, I want to get through this as quickly as possible and condense this all as quickly as possible. So moving on to the next one, Jersey Joe Archino here. Follow me on Twitter at Joe Archino and on Instagram, Jersey_Joe_Archino. And I'll see everybody in the next segment.